But we begin tonight with a pop quiz. Where did President Abraham Lincoln go to law school? The answer may surprise you. And the answer is nowhere. That is correct. He was a self-taught lawyer, and yet his judgment that seceding from the Union was unconstitutional shaped the country we live in today more than almost any other action by a U.S. president. Lincoln also had a big influence on the practice of law, writing notes for a law lecture in around 1850 that laid out guidelines for being a good lawyer, such as being, among other things, diligent, moral, a good businessman, and above all, honest. Above all, honest. Qualities the Illinois State Bar Association says are what defines the term Lincoln lawyer. The more you know. Of course, if you want to be a lawyer today, it generally requires going to law school. Only a handful of states allow you to do so without a law degree. But just because someone earns a degree doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a good lawyer. Ron DeSantis is a Harvard Law School trained lawyer. Does he seem super sharp to you? And there are some frankly stunning examples in today's headlines that show we in the U.S. are facing a crisis of lawyering. Case in point. The alleged co-conspirators in Donald Trump's latest indictment over his efforts to try and overturn the 2020 election. All of those we've identified are lawyers, all of them. Even the sixth co-conspirator, who is only referred to as a political consultant in the indictment, is identified by the New York Times as likely being Trump advisor Boris Epshteyn, who is also a lawyer. But it is Kenneth Chesebro, a.k.a. co-conspirator number 5, who really epitomizes the crisis that we are facing today. Chesebro was a researcher for one of the greatest legal minds of the modern era, Harvard Law School's Lawrence Tribe. He worked for him back in 2000 when Tribe was an attorney for Al Gore, arguing in the infamous Bush v. Gore debacle. Now, more than 20 years later, we've learned how Chesebro misappropriated and twisted and dishonestly misrepresented that very research to create a legal pretext for Trump to subvert democracy, what we know as the fake elector scheme. The New York Times obtained a copy of a previously unknown memo that he wrote that was the genesis of the scheme. NBC News has not been able to independently verify the memo, but in it, Chesebro claimed it was a controversial strategy that would likely get rejected if it were brought before the Supreme Court. He added that while it could ultimately get thrown out, airing it out publicly would, quote, buy the Trump campaign more time to challenge the election. As it relates to Trump's latest indictment, there were lawyers on both sides of the argument about whether or not you can set aside real electors for ones chosen by the losing candidate. It sounds absurd, right? We know that there were lawyers from the Trump White House, DOJ, and the various states saying, you can't do that. But then there were a slew of lawyers who were all claiming the exact opposite, many of whom are now facing or having already faced disbarment. And we all know who Trump decided to listen to. Lawyers also played a conspicuous role in the other federal case Trump is facing, the one involving classified documents. In that case, Trump tried to corrupt his own lawyers. It was his lawyers who were told by federal authorities to search for the classified documents so they could be returned to federal custody. But Trump tried to fool his lawyers by having low-level Mar-a-Lago staffers move the boxes around so the lawyers couldn't do the job they were tasked to do, even though the lawyers had to sign an attestation certifying that all the documents had been returned, signatures that could put them at risk of prosecution if the information turned out to be false. And even after they found some classified documents, one of the lawyers claims Trump wanted him to pluck out any really incriminating ones before handing them over to the FBI. Trump's legal team, as well as those staffers who are now his co-defendants, Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira, were back in a Florida courtroom today to be arraigned on the additional charges from the superseding indictment. Again, de Oliveira came without local counsel. So for the second time, his arraignment was delayed. It's been delayed another week. These two cases and the role that lawyers played in them leave us with an overriding question of whether we can trust lawyers to interpret the law as it's written, or whether they can simply get away with their own interpretation that takes them outside of the law. Because if we can't trust the lawyers, then we have a system that can't function. Their interpretation of the law matters. And this week, the American Bar Association launched a task force led by former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson and renowned conservative federal judge Michael Luttig, who you might remember from the January 6 hearings, whose focus will be to bolster public trust in our elections and remind Americans that their vote matters. According to Luttig, the task force also will address the profound obligations of lawyers under the Constitution and the rule of law. And all of this also matters because Trump has come up with a two-part strategy to try to stay out of prison. There is his legal strategy, where his emerging defense is to throw his lawyers under the bus and blame them, saying, hey, they told me I could do it. While politically, his strategy has been to attack all the prosecutors and judges involved in the cases.
Jack Smith, he's like a deranged individual, and I think we're doing very well with that guy. But he's a sick puppy. They say there's a young woman, a young racist in Atlanta. She's a racist, and they say, I guess they say that she was after a certain gang, and she ended up having an affair with the head of the gang or a gang member. And this is a person that wants to indict me. She's got a lot of problems, but she wants to indict me to try and run for some other office.
Joining me now is Katie Phang, attorney and host of The Katie Phang Show right here on MSNBC, and Charles Coleman Jr., former Brooklyn prosecutor, MSNBC legal analyst, and host of the Charles Coleman podcast. Thank you both for being here. Katie, you were in court today, and one of the things about lawyers is that you actually need a local one in order to be arraigned in the state of Florida. Does Mr. De Oliveira have a local lawyer yet?
As we sit here and have this conversation, the answer is no. So, De Oliveira took a page out of the Walt Nauta playbook today. Walt Nauta, as we know, had his arraignment reset on 2 occasions for him to secure local counsel. There was a guy who showed up today. He's a criminal defense lawyer out of West Palm Beach. He represented to the court that they were this close to getting it done and that probably tomorrow he'd be able to file a notice of appearance. However, despite the magistrate judge from a week and some change ago saying, show up and have local counsel today for your arraignment, Mr. De Oliveira, no local counsel was there. And to your point, Joy, when I practiced law for more than 20-something years in the courtrooms that I was in, and I'll specifically focus on Miami-Dade County, there was a saying on the wall behind where the judge sat. And it said, we who labor here only seek the truth. It didn't say we who labor here only seek Donald Trump's truth. It didn't say we who labor here only seek the truth when it's convenient and it fits the narrative that I want. It is a black and white application of the black letter of the law. That's the reason why we call it that, right? As we know. Today, what I saw happen with Todd Blanche and with Chris Kise that disgusted me is they kept on referring to their client as President Trump. He's not the president. And they do it again and again in the filings. That is the kind of stuff that makes our profession as lawyers look bad. That is the disingenuous move that you make as a lawyer. That is a problem with our profession. He's not the president. He's the former president. And even then today, the magistrate judge didn't take the bait, right? She said, Mr. Trump. And so it's just one small example. And people may think it's superficial, Joy, but it's an example of how dishonest the profession can be when you're just trying to service a client.
Right. And Charles, I mean, the thing about, lawyers have had various reputations, right, in the country. I mean, most of our politicians, I don't think people realize, are lawyers. Like, most elected officials are actually lawyers. They were prosecutors first, like you both were. And, there's the ambulance chaser sort of theme of lawyers. But then there's, like, when you're in trouble, who are you going to call, right? Not Ghostbusters, a lawyer, right? And the fact that we need them. But in this case, the fact that you have lawyers all around both of these cases. In the Mar-a-Lago case, you have lawyers who refuse to commit felonies for Donald Trump, right? They were refusing to do his dirty work for them. And so they're potential witnesses against their former client. It's just a weird thing. But the fact that Donald Trump tried to pull lawyers into his scheme, and the fact that in the other case in D.C., they made up the scheme, it does feel like a lawyer crisis.
Well, Joy, what we can surmise from what we're seeing here is that the law is as powerful and prolific a weapon as any other that can be wielded, but it should be reserved for those who appreciate the severity of its consequences. And what I mean by that in plain speak is this isn't for everybody. This is not something that everybody should be doing, because everyone cannot appreciate that we are all agents of democracy and democratic processes. And what I mean by that, as a lawyer, you are an extension of the court. You are an extension of those institutions which form the bedrock of American democracy. And if you are not willing to take that responsibility and that alliance as seriously as it sounds, then you should not be a part of this profession. It is very clear and very telling that Donald Trump understood the power of the law, which is why he continued to surround himself over and over and over again with lawyers who were willing to approach that line, in some cases cross it, in some cases bend it. But at the end of the day, what we are talking about are a number of people who exist in a relatively self-regulated space, which is also important to understand about the bar, who were willing to step outside of that space from an ethical standpoint in a way that gives, as Katie already alluded to, all of us a bad name.